Personal income rose almost 1% in August, the second largest increase this year. And consumer spending was up 1.2% for the month. More signs that the economy is improving.
What if I told you that 3 different times in modern American history, the government, the markets, and even the billionaires at the top all played a role in separating Americans from one of the oldest, most trusted forms of real money? Silver? What if I told you that none of these events involved secret conspiracies, no hidden cabals, just very public decisions passed into law, printed in newspapers, debated on television, yet almost no one today understands how dramatically they reshaped American wealth? And what if I told you that each of these moments happened for different reasons: national security, monetary stability, political pressure, yet all 3 led to the same outcome? Americans lost access to their silver. In this documentary, we're going to follow the true story, backed by records, legislation, and economic data, of how the United States phased silver out of its currency system, liquidated its national silver reserves, and then witnessed the most dramatic boom and bust in precious metal history during the Hunt brothers saga. Along the way, we'll examine what happened, why it happened, and how it affected everyday citizens. No myths, no exaggerations, just the real cinematic history of America's 3 great silver dispossessions. If you lived in the United States before 1968, your paper money, at least some of it, carried a remarkable promise.
This silver seal indicates that the bill is a silver certificate, which was a unique form of currency that reflected the U.S. government's commitment to backing its paper money with an actual commodity: silver. So, how do you spot?
At the bottom of every silver certificate, it read, "This certifies that there has been deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand." A simple sentence, backed by real metal. But all of that changed in the summer of 1968. By the mid-1960s, silver demand was exploding, not just for coins, but for rapidly growing industries that relied on the metal's unique conductive and photographic properties. The global photography boom, the expansion of electronics manufacturing, and rising military applications meant the U.S. Treasury was running dangerously low on silver reserves. Historians note that by 1967, the Treasury had less than 2 billion ounces remaining, a sharp decline from earlier decades and a clear warning sign that the old monetary system could not be sustained. While still substantial in absolute terms, the accelerating rate of withdrawals was not. Treasury officials feared they would soon be unable to meet obligations. Congress had a choice: keep redeeming paper dollars for real silver, or protect the nation's remaining stockpile. They chose the latter. On June 24, 1968, the U.S. Treasury officially ended silver redemption. Silver certificates were no longer exchangeable for metal. Their promised convertibility, dating back to the 19th century, was gone. It wasn't theft, it wasn't secret, it was public policy, but the effect was undeniable. Americans were cut off from real silver in their currency for the first time in generations. And this was only the beginning. By the time the U.S. ended silver redemption, a new problem had emerged. The Treasury was sitting on one of the largest silver hoards in human history, and the world was watching. For decades, the government had accumulated enormous silver reserves to mint coins and stabilize industrial supply. But after silver was removed from circulating currency in 1965, Washington no longer needed that massive stockpile. So, throughout the late 1960s and well into the 1970s, the U.S. government began gradually auctioning off silver to the private market. Treasury reports show that from 1967 to the late 1970s, the U.S. sold hundreds of millions of ounces of silver, often at deliberately low prices to prevent market speculation. The result? Prices stayed artificially depressed, good for industry, but devastating for miners and private holders who watched their assets stagnate. Critics argued, and many still argue, that this amounted to the second great silver dispossession. Americans who held silver, watched its value suppressed by the very institution that once promised to protect it. Defenders of the policy insisted it was necessary to maintain price stability and prevent economic turmoil. Both are true in their own way. But the simple fact remains: as the government sold silver, Americans lost silver as a foundation of their monetary system. But the story wasn't over. In fact, the most dramatic chapter was still ahead. If the government removed silver from money and liquidated its reserves, there was one group of men who were determined to bring silver back into the spotlight: Nelson Bunker. Hunt, William Herbert Hunt, two heirs to the Texas oil dynasty. Beginning in the early 1970s, the Hunts began accumulating enormous quantities of silver, initially as a hedge against inflation and geopolitical instability. Their fear of fiat money wasn't unusual for the era. The dollar had left the gold standard in 1971, and inflation was climbing rapidly. By 1979, the Hunts, along with a group of partners, controlled, according to Commodity Futures Trading Commission reports, over 100 million ounces of physical silver, plus massive futures contracts representing additional tens of millions of ounces. Some estimates place the Hunts' footprint at roughly half of the world's deliverable silver supply. And as demand surged, silver prices skyrocketed. On January 21, 1980, silver reached its historic peak, $49.45 per ounce, equivalent to over $180 per ounce in today's inflation-adjusted dollars. But the party didn't last. Regulators, fearing a runaway bubble and potential financial collapse, imposed new restrictions on silver trading, including liquidation-only orders that prevented new long positions. Whether these actions were necessary market protections or targeted interventions remains debated by economists. But the outcome was clear. Silver prices collapsed. By March 1980, silver had fallen below $11 per ounce and kept sinking. The Hunts, once among the richest families in America, were financially ruined. But the real story wasn't just about them. Millions of ordinary Americans, inspired by headlines, by inflation fears, by the promise of precious metals, had bought silver at or near the top. When the Hunt bubble burst, it wasn't billionaires who suffered the most. It was everyday citizens who lost savings, lost investments, and lost faith in silver altogether. This was the third great silver dispossession, not mandated by law, but shaped by the interplay of government, markets, and human behavior. Americans had regained interest in silver, only to see it slip through their fingers once again. Looking back across these three moments, 1968, the sell-off era, and the Hunt brothers' crash, a striking pattern emerges. Americans didn't lose their silver all at once. It was taken, indirectly but decisively, in phases. First, the government severed silver from the dollar. Second, it dismantled its own silver stockpile, reshaping the market. Third, when public enthusiasm for silver surged again, the greatest spike in history ended in collapse. Different causes, different motivations, different outcomes, but all three left Americans with less silver, economically, historically, and symbolically, than at any previous point in the nation's history. Today, silver still plays a role in industry, investment, and culture, but it no longer backs our currency. It no longer sits in vast government vaults, and it no longer forms the foundation of America's monetary identity. Instead, silver has become something else, a reminder of how money evolves, how policy reshapes markets, and how even the most trusted metals can be swept away by the tides of history. Whether you see these events as necessary modernization or three quiet betrayals, one truth remains. Americans were separated from their silver, not in secret, but in plain sight. If you found this story eye-opening, here's my question for you. Do you think silver will ever return as part of the U.S. monetary system? Or is that chapter closed forever? Let me know in the comments. Tap the like button if you want more deep dives into financial history. Subscribe for the next documentary, and as always, thanks for watching.